The Outbreak. In a secret laboratory hidden deep beneath the streets of a bustling city, a team of scientists worked tirelessly on a groundbreaking project. Led by the brilliant but enigmatic Dr. Elaine Vogel, they had been tasked with creating a new virus, one that could revolutionize modern medicine. The virus, codenamed Lazarus, was designed to regenerate damaged tissue and organs, effectively reversing the effects of aging and disease. But something went wrong. The virus mutated, becoming something far more sinister than they had ever imagined. Dr. Vogel, consumed by her obsession with the project, refused to acknowledge the warning signs. She pushed her team harder, demanding results at any cost. The first test subject, a homeless man named Patient Zero, was brought in off the streets. They injected him with the virus, expecting to see miraculous results, but instead, they watched in horror as the man's body began to change. His skin turned pale and lifeless, his eyes glazed over, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh consumed him. The scientists tried to contain the outbreak, but it was too late. Patient Zero broke free from his restraints and attacked the researchers. The virus spread like wildfire, infecting everyone in the laboratory. Dr. Vogel, in a desperate attempt to cover up her mistakes, sealed off the lab, trapping her team inside with the ravenous undead. But the virus didn't stop there. It found its way out of the lab, carried by the fleeing scientists who had been lucky enough to escape. Within hours, the city was in chaos as the infection spread like a plague, turning ordinary people into mindless, flesh-eating monsters. The Lazarus virus had been unleashed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first reports of strange attacks trickled in from the outskirts of the city. Witnesses described seeing individuals with pale, rotting skin and lifeless eyes attacking and devouring their victims. The authorities, struggling to make sense of the situation, dismissed the reports as drug-fueled hallucinations or exaggerated tales. But then, the videos started surfacing online. Shaky footage captured on smartphones showed the horrifying reality of the situation. The attackers were not human, not anymore. They moved with an unnatural gait, their bodies contorted and twisted, their mouths hung open, revealing blackened teeth and a hunger for human flesh. Panic spread like wildfire as the truth became undeniable. The dead were rising, and they had an insatiable appetite for the living. The military was called in, but even they were unprepared for the sheer scale of the outbreak. The streets became a battlefield, with gunfire and screams echoing through the one bustling city. Maria, a young nurse, found herself at the center of the chaos. She had been working at the city hospital when the first infected patients arrived. At first, she thought it was just another case of drug overdose or violent assault. But as more and more patients poured in, their bodies ravaged by a strange infection, she realized that something far more sinister was at play. She watched in horror as her colleagues fell victim to the virus, their bodies twisting and contorting as they transformed into the undead. Dr. Hernandez, the kind-hearted physician who had been a mentor to Maria, was one of the first to turn. He attacked a group of nurses, tearing into their flesh with a savagery that was wholly unlike the gentleman Maria had known. Maria barely managed to escape the hospital, fleeing into the streets as the city descended into madness. She ran, her heart pounding in her chest, as the screams of the dying and the undead echoed in her ears. She made her way to her apartment building, hoping to find safety and shelter. But when she arrived, she found only chaos. Her neighbors had turned on each other, fighting over food and supplies as the power went out and the water stopped running. Maria barricaded herself in her apartment, watching from her window as the city burned. She knew that she couldn't stay there forever, but she had nowhere else to go. The streets were a death trap, filled with the shambling corpses of the infected. As the days stretched into weeks, Maria's supplies began to run low. She knew that she would have to venture out into the city soon, to find food and water, but the thought of facing the horrors that awaited her filled her with a deep, primal dread. She had never been a fighter, never been one to take risks. But now, in this new world where the dead roamed the earth, she knew that she would have to become something more than she had ever been before. She would have to find the strength and courage to survive, no matter the cost. As the weeks turned into months, the survivors of the outbreak banded together, forming small communities in the ruins of the city. They fortified their homes, scavenging for supplies and weapons to defend themselves against the undead hordes. Maria found herself part of a group of survivors holed up in an abandoned office building, led by a former police officer named David. They had managed to create a relatively safe haven, with barricaded entrances and a rooftop garden where they grew what little food they could. But even in the relative safety of their compound, the survivors knew that they were far from secure. The zombies were a constant threat, always lurking just beyond the barricades. And with each passing day, their numbers seemed to grow as more and more of the infected found their way into the city. Maria and the other survivors spent their days fortifying their defenses and scavenging for supplies. They ventured out into the city in small groups, always on the lookout for food, water, and ammunition. But each trip was a perilous journey fraught with danger and uncertainty. They encountered other survivors, some friendly and others hostile. They formed tenuous alliances, trading information and resources. But trust was a rare commodity in this new world, and betrayal lurked around every corner. As the months dragged on, the survivors began to lose hope. They had heard rumors of a safe haven, a place untouched by the infection, but no one knew if it really existed. Some wanted to set out in search of it, to risk everything on the chance of finding a better life. Others wanted to stay put, to hold on to what little they had managed to build. Maria found herself torn. She knew that staying in the city was a death sentence in the long run. The zombies would never stop coming, and their supplies would eventually run out. But the thought of venturing out into the unknown, of facing the horrors that lurked beyond the city limits, filled her with a deep, primal fear. In the end, it was David who made the decision. He had received a radio transmission from a group of soldiers, claiming to have secured a military bunker in the mountains. They were offering shelter and protection to any survivors who could make it to them. David rallied the survivors, urging them to take the chance. He knew that it was a gamble, that there was no guarantee that the soldiers were telling the truth. But he also knew that they had no other choice. They had to find a way out of the city, or they would all die there. And so, with heavy hearts and a grim determination, the survivors set out on the long, perilous journey to the mountains. They knew that many of them would not make it, that the road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. But they also knew that they had to try, that they had to hold on to the hope of a better future, no matter how slim that hope might be. As they left the city behind, Maria looked back at the place that had once been her home. She knew that she would never see it again, that the life she had once known was gone forever. But she also knew that she had to keep moving forward, that she had to find the strength and courage to face whatever lay ahead. She took a deep breath, shouldered her backpack, and followed David and the others into the unknown. The journey to the mountains was a nightmare. The survivors had to navigate through a landscape that had been ravaged by the outbreak, a world where the dead roamed free and the living were few and far between. They encountered other groups of survivors, some friendly and others hostile. They traded information and resources when they could, but they also had to fight to protect what was theirs. The world had become a harsh and unforgiving place, where the strong preyed on the weak and trust was a luxury that few could afford. As they made their way deeper into the wilderness, the zombies became more aggressive, their numbers seeming to grow with each passing day. The survivors had to be constantly on guard, always ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. They lost people along the way. Some fell victim to the zombies, their screams of agony echoing through the forest as they were torn apart. Others simply disappeared, wandering off into the night and never returning. And some turned on their fellow survivors, driven mad by the horrors they had witnessed and the desperation of their situation. Maria found herself taking on a leadership role, her medical training and calm demeanor making her a valuable asset to the group. She tended to the wounded and the sick, using what little supplies they had to keep people alive. She also found herself acting as a mediator, trying to keep the peace between the different factions that had emerged within the group. There was Jack, the former soldier who had appointed himself as the group's de facto leader. He was a hard man shaped by a lifetime of violence and conflict. He saw the world in stark terms of black and white, of us and them. He was fiercely protective of the group, but he could also be ruthless when he needed to be. There was also Sarah, a young woman who had lost her entire family to the outbreak. She was quiet and withdrawn, rarely speaking to anyone. But Maria could see the pain and anger that lurked behind her eyes, the rage that simmered just beneath the surface. And then there was Alex, a teenager who had been born after the outbreak. He had never known a world without zombies, had never experienced the simple joys of a normal life. He was reckless and impulsive, always eager to prove himself to the older survivors. As they pressed on through the wilderness, the survivors faced countless challenges and dangers. They had to cross raging rivers and scale steep cliffs, all while fending off the relentless attacks of the undead. They scavenged for food and water wherever they could find it, hunting game and foraging for plants in the forest. But even as they struggled to survive, they never lost sight of their goal. They knew that the military bunker was their only hope, their only chance at a better life. And so they pressed on, day after day, mile after mile, their determination never wavering. Finally, after weeks of hard travel, they reached the mountains. They could see the bunker in the distance, a squat concrete structure nestled in a valley between two peaks. But as they approached, they realized that something was wrong. The bunker was surrounded by a sea of the undead, a writhing mass of flesh and teeth that stretched as far as the eye could see. The soldiers who had promised them shelter were nowhere to be seen, and the survivors knew that they were on their own. They had come so far, had fought so hard to reach this place, and now, at the very moment of their triumph, they were faced with an impossible choice. They could try to fight their way through the horde, to reach the safety of the bunker, or they could turn back to brave the long and perilous journey back to the city. In the end, it was Jack who made the decision. He knew that they had come too far to turn back now, that they had to see this through to the end. And so, with a roar of defiance, he led the charge, his rifle blazing as he carved a path through the sea of the undead. The others followed, their own weapons at the ready. Maria found herself in the thick of the fighting, her scalpel and her wits her only weapons against the relentless onslaught of the zombies. She fought with a savagery that she had never known she possessed, driven by a desperate need to survive. In the end, they made it to the bunker, but at a terrible cost. More than half of the survivors had fallen in the battle, their bodies lost among the piles of the slain undead. Jack was among them, his broken body lying at the entrance to the bunker, a final testament to his bravery and sacrifice. As the survivors staggered into the bunker, they knew that they had reached the end of their journey. They had found the safe haven they had been seeking, but the price had been higher than any of them had ever imagined. And as they looked out over the sea of the undead that still surrounded the bunker, they knew that their struggle was far from over. They had survived the outbreak, had made it to the safety of the bunker, but the world outside was still a nightmare, a place where the dead roamed free and the living were hunted. They would have to find a way to build a new life here, in this cold and lonely place. They would have to learn to trust each other, to work together to create something better than the world they had left behind. It would not be easy, and many of them would not survive the challenges that lay ahead. But as Maria looked around at the faces of the survivors, at the determination and the hope that shone in their eyes, she knew that they would find a way. They had already lost so much, had already sacrificed so much, but they had also found something, too. They had found each other, had found a reason to keep fighting, to keep living. And so, as the sun began to set over the mountains, Maria and the other survivors settled in for their first night in the bunker. They knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that there would be many more battles to fight and many more losses to endure. But they also knew that they had each other, that they were no longer alone in this nightmare world. And as they huddled together in the darkness, sharing what little food and water they had left, they dared to hope that somewhere out there, beyond the walls of the bunker and the hordes of the undead, there was still a future worth fighting for. Years have passed since the survivors first arrived at the bunker. They have managed to build a new life for themselves, a small but thriving community in the heart of the mountains. They have learned to grow their own food, to generate their own power, and to defend themselves against the occasional zombie attack. They have even managed to make contact with other survivor communities, trading goods and information across the vast distances that separate them. Maria has become a leader in the community, her medical skills and her compassion making her a valued member of the group. She has taken on the role of teacher, passing on her knowledge to a new generation of survivors who have been born in the bunker. But even as they have created a new life for themselves, the survivors have never forgotten the world they left behind. They still tell stories of the outbreak, of the horrors they witnessed and the sacrifices they made. And they still hold out hope that somewhere out there, beyond the mountains and the forests and the ruins of the old world, there is a cure for the Lazarus virus. They know that it is a slim hope, a fragile dream in a world that has become a nightmare. But they cling to it nonetheless, because they know that without hope, without the belief that a better future is possible, they will surely succumb to the darkness that surrounds them. And so they keep fighting, keep living, keep dreaming of a world that is free from the curse of the undead. They know that the road ahead is long and uncertain, that there will be many more challenges and heartbreaks to come. But they also know that they have each other, that they are bound together by the shared experience of survival in a world gone mad. And as long as they have that, as long as they have the strength and the courage to keep fighting, they know that there is still a chance for a better tomorrow. As Maria stands on the roof of the bunker, looking out over the mountains that have become her home, she feels a sense of hope and purpose that she never thought she would feel again. She knows that the world is a different place now, that the old ways of living are gone forever. But she also knows that there is still beauty in this world, still moments of joy and laughter and love that make all the struggle and the sacrifice worthwhile. And as long as there are still people like her, people who refuse to give up, who refuse to let the darkness win, then there is still hope for the future. And so, with a smile on her face and a song in her heart, Maria turns back to the bunker, ready to face whatever challenges the new day may bring. She knows that the road ahead will be hard, that there will be many more battles to fight and many more losses to endure. But she also knows that she is not alone, that she has a family and a community that will stand with her, no matter what. And as long as she has that, as long as she has the love and the support of the people around her, then she knows that she can face anything that this brave new world may throw at her.